Okay, so this is where we're going to finish setting up the character. So let's open up the character. So this is your event graph for that character. So this is kind of an introduction to blueprints, getting slightly more advanced. So it's really just a case of starting to get your head around blueprints. It's a beautiful visual scripting system that avoids any type of coding, which is excellent. So I'm just looking for input axes, which is move forward. And also move right. We're setting up the axis movement for move forward and move right. That's actually getting the move right, so that's incorrect, but we'll go back to that in a moment. So what we want to do, I'm just going to show you here that if we look at the project settings and the input settings again, we're just using the same names. So move forward and move right are the names we have set up for the axis movement. So delete that. Input axis move right. So we're going to set up in blueprints, we're going to set up, done it wrong again, we're going to get there sometime today. So what we're going to do here is we're going to set up exactly what we need for blueprints. Are going to tell the character what it needs to do when we press these input axes, and the axes, because this works with a controller, so an axis, control axis basically works in float value, so it's not finite value, so you can move. In some games you're able to move at variations of speed, as opposed to you don't just walk and then run. You can move in between those two states, which is what we are going to be doing. So just adding a branch in here, and then so I'm just checking if when we're moving forward whether we've disabled the movement. So I've just dragged that that variable in that we set up previously, the disable movement. So we're not actually using that as yet, but the branch will tell us that if the condition is false, so if disable movement is not turned on and it's false, then we will add a movement input to the character. So the axis value is multiplied by the scale value, so as soon as you press forward on the axis, that value goes into the scale of the transform direction for the character. Sounds a bit complicated, but you'll get the hang of it. So get control rotation, so this is a bit more complicated. This is to do with breaking down the rotation of the axes and then translating it into a direction. So basically this is slightly outside of my knowledge of blueprints at this stage. So really what I'm doing here is I'm copying. So returning the value, get forward vector. So it's breaking the rotator down into, we just want the yaw value here. So we're just looking for one value, which is get forward vector. Okay, so it's breaking down the values. So one of them goes forward and one of them is going to go right. So I'm not sure why that's called the rotator. So when the input axis is pressed move right, we branch again just to check that the movement isn't disabled, and then if it isn't disabled then we will go on false, as in the disabled movement is false, and then we multiply the move right by the scale value. Okay, so that's the entire setup for move forward and move left and right. So again, at this stage I won't get too concerned about understanding that completely, but you will note that the speed of setting that up with regards kind of trying to code that in C# and the perpetual iteration of syntax. So kind of project settings and input again. So yeah, we just want to set up the mouse buttons now. So this isn't a particularly common way of moving, but so as you press left and right, I think you can rotate with your mouse and move forward on the left and right value. So it's fairly common in RPGs. So if I can remember how to type lookup, so we don't want get lookup, we want input axis. Okay, so input axis lookup. So this is coming off your controls, input axis. This is coming directly out of your input, whatever you're pressing, whatever you're moving on your controller. So your input, roll input. So these are basically, the turn is actually moving the camera, which moves the character, I believe. So this is all quite simple, although the terminology at this stage may be slightly confusing. It is slightly alien to me, but this is the purpose of the exercise, to start getting to grips with it. So the more time you spend in the blueprints, the better, really. So input action, so we remember that we put in some special actions, and one of them was a jog. So again, it's just reading out of our inputs. So looking for something. I think I'm probably okay. Okay, so I'm just trying to bring in the character movement. Jog pressed, it shouldn't be set. So you can set variables. So if you're getting them, you're getting the value as it is currently, and if you are setting it, obviously you're setting the boolean to tell it that, for instance, that button is pressed. So I need to check if jog is pressed. You can't crouch, or maybe you can crouch, but you'll be going at a different speed, I think. So we need to find out if the jog button is pressed. So I think we're going to put a branch in here. Nope. So context sensitive on that menu will always give you the whatever's available from that particular component within the blueprint window. So it tries to help you, but sometimes if you can't find something, just turn off context sensitive in that window, and you'll be able to search for it, and you should be able to find it. So I'm setting there the max walk speed if jog is pressed and if it's released. So that's feeding back into the character movement as the target. So I have got a branch in there, yeah. So if jog pressed is true, so if it's released and true, then, and crouch pressed, sorry, if crouch so that's the condition for the branch, is that crouch press is true. We're going to set the max walk speed to be slightly less than if it's false, in which case obviously you can walk faster if you're not crouching. I don't know, maybe some people can walk faster when they're crouching, but I haven't ever seen that. Okay, so that's the it's all feeding back into the character movement. So when it's false, yeah, so if crouch pressed is false, then you can walk faster. Makes sense. Okay, so next up we are looking for another action, which is the crouch. So we're going to set this up in a similar sort of way. So I want to make sure we've got jog pressed and prone pressed in there as variables. We're getting those variables, or those booleans. So if prone is pressed, yeah, so as a condition on that branch, if prone is pressed, then and it is, if prone is pressed and you won't be able to crouch directly from prone, so if it's pressed then you shouldn't be able to crouch. We don't have animations to go between prone and crouched or vice versa. So flip-flop means if you press it once it does A, and if you press it again it does B. Okay, so in this case I think that'll activate crouch and deactivate crouch. It's the kind of thing you do in games. Okay, so jog pressed, so setting crouch pressed, crouch isn't pressed on A, crouch is pressed on B. Yes, on both A and B I'm setting crouch pressed to false. So I need to click one of those, so that's when, if crouch is pressed, then you won't be able to so that is activating crouch pressed. If jog is pressed, you're going to move at a slightly different speed. So again, we're talking about the max walk speeds. So this is just the speed you'll be moving at if you are crouching. So again, I'm just copying these over to save myself bother of dragging them in again. So character movement is effectively just applying all the movement back to the character. I'm not sure if character movement, it must be a vector 3, I presume, so it's a transform value. But I'm not exactly sure what type of variable character movement is, but it's applying all of the movement back, all the variables back to the character movement, so it's calculating that for us, which is very useful. Sort of thing that I would find very difficult to do in code. So jog pressed, if jog pressed is true, you are going to crouch and walk at a slightly higher speed, and if it's false, then you're going to walk at a, if jog pressed is false, then you're going to walk at a slightly slower speed. Okay, so that's actually crouch walk. So I've just taken this out of the actual tutorial, the Unreal tutorial, official tutorial. We'll check if we're currently prone, in which case we'll not allow the character to crouch. As I mentioned, we don't have an animation. Flip flop, which turns the flip flop turns it on and off, and so it says it's true, and then if you press it a second time it turns it off. So you can see the little crouch pressed tick, that's affecting your boolean value on your variable. And so set the maximum walk speed back to 200. So I think now I'm moving to prone. I need 2 more to go, I hope. So prone, in this case we are just going to make prone, you just drop to the ground, and then there'll be no movement. So effectively it's disabling the movement. So that's where we're bringing our disable movement variable, which I think the other video cut off slightly before I set the name on that, but I'm sure you clever people will have worked it out. Okay, just tidying things up a bit. So pressed, we're going to branch again. So the condition here will be that if crouch is pressed, you can't go to prone. So again we've got a flip flop, so that's turning it on and off. So set prone pressed, and I've put disable. So I think we want to set disable movement in both of those. So if crouch is pressed, it falls. If crouch pressed is false, you want to turn on prone pressed, and then so yeah, we want to make sure both of those are prone pressed. So that's really just a case of turning it on and off if on the condition that prone is not pressed. So if prone is not pressed, so what's happening here is that we're making sure that we set disabled movement to on if prone is pressed, which means you can't do anything because you can't move anywhere, which is a condition that has been checked with all the other movement functions. Okay, so I'm just going to show you the official documentation from Unreal, just to quickly go through this, I believe. So disabling movement if prone is pressed. If prone isn't pressed, we've set a delay there before we allow movement again, so that the character can come out of the animation. So here we go. So I'm just taking it back to the start there, so you can see all of it. So check if we're currently crouched, and if so, not allowing the character to enter a prone state because we don't have the animations. Flip flop again, transitions between the states. So we set prone press and disable movement both as true and allow a character to enter the prone state. When we press a second time, it sets the prone state to false, and the delay is to prevent the player from moving around while the animation is moving back to one of the movement animations. So it waits until the character has got out of the prone state, so that we're not moving in a prone state, or we're not animating in that prone state. Okay, so character movement again. I think this okay, so the jump is the last one we're going to do in our move. So this again is an input action. So again, we're feeding it back into character movement. Just checking disable movement. So we don't want to be able to jump if we're in prone, for instance. And we want to check if crouch is pressed. I presume that'll be a jump straight up. I think with jump you're going to have to check whether or not you're moving forward, whether you're standing on the spot. So get max walk speed. Okay, so if the input action jump is pressed, we want to set up a branch. Condition here being is disable movement set as usual. So the only thing that sets disable movement is if we're in a prone state. A prone state. Okay. And if the jump is released, we set jump pressed to be negative, so we know that people aren't jumping. We've got another branch here. Just to check, in this case, we've got another condition. So it's checking the disable movement first, and it's checking the crouch pressed. And if the crouch is pressed, I'm pretty sure we're going to do something different here. So we've got another branch. Very exciting. Okay, so that's so if max walk speed is greater than, so just checking the value of the walk speed. If it's greater than 160, which is values we previously set above in the movement constraints, if it's above 160, if that's true, so that should be true actually, not false. Break that. Trying to break it. Can I break it? Let me break it. Okay, I don't know what's happening here. It's gone mad. Hey! Okay, so if it's false, we're going to another branch. So true goes to that branch and false goes to that branch, but we've got another condition to check. And this is going to be the velocity. So we're getting the velocity here, and then we're returning the value. Okay, so we just need to actually check character movement. I want to get the velocity, I believe, from the character movement, because we want to make sure it's the velocity of the character. So yeah, so we want to check the velocity on the character at that time. That's the condition. So if that's true, we need to make sure to check what that is, of course, if it's greater than or equal to. That's not correct. So it's automatically cut off that branch because it doesn't make any sense. So so it's kind of helping us. I'll just turn back on context sensitive to help myself. Yes. Okay, so again, this is a node I'm not particularly familiar with. So vector length, it's going to have to be greater than or smaller than. So if the velocity is, I'm not entirely sure what vector length is, but it's to do with one of the transform values. So if it's greater than 0 and it's true, then we will jump. So I'm wondering if it's false, whether, okay, stop jumping. Okay, so that doesn't look correct to me. Okay. Okay, so we're setting out, right, I see what's happening here is that I am trying to, it's not going to jump as high, or the velocity is not going to be as great if you're jumping from a crouch. So they're both, on both conditions, the character will still jump, but if you are crouching, it's going to have a much lower velocity, which means you'll do a little floppy jump. And then, I presume we're going to set the jump pressed, yeah. Okay, so we set the jump pressed to false in both of these, I believe, to say that the jump is over. Okay. Oh no, we set the jump pressed to true, so we can't do. So basically, what I'm doing there is I'm setting the jump pressed to true to tell the other movement controls or functions that we are jumping. So if you look here just underneath input action jump, it says released, and that's where we set the jump pressed as not being true. So as soon as you release, jump press is not true. If you've got the button held down, it does everything within that that function. Okay, so if you look down at the second chunk of text there, set how high the character can jump based on. Okay, so as I said, it's really a case of yes, so it's really a case of not jumping as high. If you are if you are crouched. Okay, and that's that. Okay, thanks. See you soon.